So we're good at that.
Yeah.
We've done it. Yeah.
I'm not the drunk you think I am. I'm the worst one.
I'm the other one. I'm the sober one.
People like Vince Vaughn or the Big Show. You can't miss.
You're good.
All right, on. You good?
Right.
Yeah.
We can begin at any time.
Welcome everyone to GM Masterclass. All right. So to get just an idea of where you guys are sitting in terms of GM experience, how many are really new GMs, like under 5 years of experience? Okay. Third of the room. And 6 to 10, 6 to 15, and more than 15 years. All right.
Uh-oh,
Good.
tough crowd.
Yeah. No, so it's good. It's good because that means there'll be some feedback from the audience as well. If people come up with really good ideas and we can riff off of each other in terms of good suggestions for newbie GMs, don't be shy to chime in. So Ed and I think we're going to just give you guys a couple of basic best practices, and I think we're going to open it up to Q&A after that.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be your very first tip to brand new GMs? Like the most common pitfall that you hear someone come up to your door and knock and going, "My game group's driving me bananas," or "This is driving me bananas." How do I solve that?
My number one thing would be to give your characters not an exhausting backstory, but enough of a backstory that they understand where their character is starting from without it being a straitjacket that they have to play this role. You are Macbeth. Just be Macbeth. You know, you don't want that. But you want to know where your character is starting from. And with the starting from, you can put in a few lines that lets them know that they have a feud going on between the Montagues and the Capulets, and they're one of them. They have an aversion to cats because of the 16 cats that tried to kill them when they were 3 years old, or whatever. And then you can also add in things that are of the future, the near future, as in, your father's going to kick you out if you don't get a job. Or your whole family's going to have to move because their house and all the other houses on the street are going to be demolished by order of the king in a couple months. So your mother's in a tizzy, your father's drinking himself into an early grave because he doesn't know what to do, because he doesn't have the money for a new house and he doesn't know where to move to. So I guess it's all up to you. So you put both spurs and backstory stuff that establishes some relationships in general that your character has with the world. I know you'll get into other stuff later about relationships, but that gives you enough to the person can understand the character that you've handed to them. A character is not stats. A character is who are you playing, and you have to give them a chance to mold their character. That's a starting point. And you can also tailor what's in the character as they're handed it to make them have to work with the other characters in their party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things you notice over years of play, exactly what you said in terms of what is the crux of your character. If someone were to summarize their character if they've never played an RPG, they're going to say, you know, this is a warrior that was orphaned, he came out of a battle-scarred country, he wants to reclaim, you know, his lineage. He has, you know, a pet tiger, and his sword speaks to him whenever there's a full moon. And then you as a GM are like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to fit that into this game system. But you see how that imagination is boundless at the beginning, right? And when you ask someone who's been playing for 10 years, like, what are you? Oh, I want to make a level 12 ranger with, you know, this specialization in these feats. And it just becomes a lot less story driven. And so I think one of the things that you want to try to keep going is that magic, and keep that sense of what is the real story behind your character rather than a collection of stats or elements of the rule book as the collage. And to build off of what you mentioned in terms of relationships, one of my number one questions that I get when people ask, you know, they go, when I start out my game, my players create their characters all independently, and then, you know, they find a treasure, a magical item, they start arguing over it, and then it's almost like a PvP. There's going to be initiative, and they're going to start fighting over it, or they go, well, I don't know, I don't want to adventure with you guys. I want to go off and do my own lone wolf thing. So there's like party cohesion issues, or they don't have a reason to adventure together. And so one of the things that I advise is you end up having your characters at the very beginning of the adventure have relationships with one another. And so those relationships, once built, will kind of head off any of those kinds of PvP elements that would spring up from inexperienced players that are like, I don't know how to handle this, so let's just, you know, draw swords and stab each other. So if they've got those elements of relationships, they can kind of fall back on those and kind of resolve their differences through those relationships.
Mm-hmm. Then the next thing comes to give your players something to do. I don't just mean ram them down into the center of a dungeon being attacked on all sides by beholders and lizard men. What do you do?
Yeah.
Not that sort of what do you do, but give them choices so they can get used to the fact that, hey, we choose the adventure, we choose our road in life. Give them a few spurs, like, hey, you have to make rent in this city, but don't make them as bad and depressing as real life, because then, no, why are they wasting 3 or 4 hours sitting with you?
Your character has to do their taxes.
Yeah. But I mean, you put in little tiny spurs, but you also give them adventure possibilities that aren't the railroady sort where you walk into a bar and the guy says, "You look like a likely adventurer. Did you know there's a dragon right outside devouring maidens? I think you should write the man." And then they rips the door open and the dragon sees you. That's a little railroad.
Is it though?
But if you encourage them to be in situations where they will overhear city gossip or village gossip or gossip on the road, wagon merchants who are creaking along in slow-moving wagons, and they're saying, "Hey, did you hear about the?" You know, because they're passing the time with each other, and give them a huge buffet of possible adventures, news and rumors, interesting things that are going along, so that it isn't railroady, so that there are lots of things for them to pick and choose from, and then get them used to picking and choosing, and then you already have adventure directions for them to follow on their own. And then, of course, we come to everybody loves a mystery. It's always nice to put something mysterious in the setting that their lives do not depend upon, and the fate of the world does not depend upon, but little mysteries like if somebody keeps leaving flowers on Jim Morrison's grave at this particular time every year, who is it? In other words, you're choosing something that's color and something that could be tied to an adventure. It's like, wait a minute, there's no flowers this year. Instead, there's a huge pile of blood, and there's a trail of blood leading back to the cemetery. You know, it leads to this one tomb, and it ends there. How did that happen? Did the person just fly away the tomb, or can you get into that tomb? And then, you know, there's a cabal that meets in tomb. I mean, this is not a new idea. I used it like 50 years ago, the Dungeon of the Crypt in Waterdeep. You know, there are certain crypts, you open the lid and say hi to the stiff, and you open his lid and you go down the stairs there into the underground meeting chamber of the cute cabal. And you see, that's another thing, because this could have nothing to do with the player characters, but they could be there in a situation to see it, and it's one, okay, now they have a secret. And then they realize somebody's tailing them 2 or 3 days later. Not doing anything to them, just tailing them. Oh, did somebody see us watching? And then you can decide, based on what the players do, whether that cabal is going to try and off them to silence them, whether they're going to try and recruit them, or whether they're just going to try and blackmail them. So it'd be pity if your father knew you were in the graveyard at that time of night, besmirching the fair reputation of the family. We just need this one little thing done for us. You know, and that's the slippery slope that begins the road. And the thing is, as a dungeon master, you can throw all of those at your players, and again, let them choose.
And the more you throw, the less likely they're going to be able to be asses and go, yeah, you set the quest this way, we're going that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Less chance they can derail you.
Now they're too blame
Yeah.
busy staying alive and making the right moral choices. Like, I want to live, you know.
I think my next tip would be, let's rewind even before the campaign begins. So how many of you guys are aware of session 0 as a concept? Yeah, so that is extremely important. This is something that I advise to all new GMs, is to have a session 0, to have everyone kind of get on the same page in terms of expectations of campaign. Because every single one of the players is going to have, okay, their own personal storyline that they want to do. Some people want to do high magic, some people want to do low magic, some people are saying, oh, is this going to be like a one-shot when we move into another RPG? Another person's got in mind they're going to be playing this for the next 5 years. You know, what level are we starting at? You know, which world, if we're playing D&D, which world are we playing in? And then, you know, if there are any house rules, you know, what are the GM's house rules? This way, it cuts down again on the kind of friction that happens later in a campaign when all of this is not kind of put on the table before the session starts, because that's when you want someone to say, okay, this is not my bag. I'm going to go find another game group or another GM, rather than, you know, them kind of like fighting against the group for like the first 10 sessions and then realizing it afterwards. And that kind of kills the joy for everyone in the group for quite some time. So session 0 is a great place for that. And that's where it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, your life path system, like where we start talking about the backgrounds. So you can build on session 0 where the backgrounds are going to come into play for your characters, the relationships between the characters. And the other one is, you can even start where your town is going to be, where you're going to start out, like what is the town about, and kind of start talking collaboratively. Maybe you want to build the town together. I don't know if you guys ever played RPGs like Microscope or things like that, where it's an RPG that's a little bit more collaborative and everyone gets an input and a say in terms of how something works. So, like, we've had several adventures where we say, okay, we're going to start in this little village and this is your home village. And instead of the GM going, okay, I'm going to design your entire home village, you throw it back at the players and you say, all right, tell me what's the main thing your village is known for? Okay, and they'll say fishing. And then you'll say, okay, what's the biggest secret that your village has that you don't want anyone to know about? And they'll come up with like, the boat maker's really bad, so there's a lot of sunken ships in the bay. And then you could say, you know, what are the vices, that, you know, black markets or anything in your village? And then, you know, who are the most renowned people from your village? And then, so you have this kind of like really fun thing where when they build their life path system, they're like their backgrounds of their characters, they're also building out their starting location collaboratively with you.
And you started by saying, let's rewind.
Yeah.
Which brings me to timekeeping. Timekeeping is like doing math class or economics. Oh crap! You know, I came here for fun.
Yeah.
And most people think of timekeeping as making sure your players can't get from A to B in no time at all, or they short shift their long rests or short rests or their training time or whatever.
Fade to black.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't even think of it in that way at all. I think of timekeeping as you, the game master, are keeping track of things in the wider world. And the danger here is, for novices, they go into the really big things, like today a volcano erupted. Today one god killed another god. All this big stuff. No, what you really want is, in that village, that starting village or town, this is the day that the 3 men that the mayor owes money to come to collect. And it's good. It has taken them this many weeks or 10 days or months or whatever to get from where their bases are. Yeah. And same thing with all the trading cabals and the smuggling cabal in the village, the ships that are sailing from here, there, and everywhere, particularly ships that are bringing news, like news that your party of adventurers slaughtered the Baron and the next thingy. How long does it take news to get back? Does somebody run along the road and tell them right away? Or is it going to take 2 weeks and be by the next boat? Hey, did you know that some guys from your village slaughtered the Baron? Okay, so you're doing the timekeeping of the things that are player adjacent in the world and how they flow along while your player characters are busy doing something else, like killing beholders down in the dungeon, or whatever it is they're doing. They're busy doing this, and the rest of the world is flowing along like that. And that can be oodles of fun. It can also be oodles of work if you do it the wrong way, and it becomes this bookkeeping chore that you just don't want to do, which basically means sooner or later you stop doing it. Or you get so skimpy and spotty that it's like, oh, I haven't said what the Holy Roman Empire is doing for 3 effing months now. Oh well. And then you have to sit down and it becomes like homework. Well, I gotta fill all that in. No. You don't want to do it that way. You just want to keep little point form one-liner things here and there.
The high water marks.
Yeah, of what things are happening. Now, yeah, occasionally there will be big things. Like, a volcano erupted in that island that your ship was sailing toward. Doesn't exist anymore. So I guess they're gonna go somewhere else in mid-voyage. But the other thing is, little stuff about, say, the creditors that the player characters owe money to in their local community. You keep track of them. Hey, so-and-so's sick. Maybe we can get out of not paying him for another, week. Maybe that'll give us time to shake down that other guy and get enough money to pay him. Yeah, let's do that. And it's those sort of things. You want to keep track of stuff in a meaningful time flow thing. Unless you're writing fantasy novels, or you happen to be doing fantasy movies, which I'm sure all of you in this room are doing right now as we speak.
Your campaigns will turn into fantasy
Yes,
movies
yeah,
one day, right?
Yeah. But until that happens, you probably won't have to worry about characters on screen getting from point A to point B in too short a time. And of course, we all know how they're going to do it. It's going to be a spell or a portal, because you forgot that it was a 4 months travel time from X to B, A to
Fade
B.
to black.
Yeah.
So what would be the next one? I guess the third one that would pop into my head that I get most often from players that are new is, how much should I prep for my campaigns? So a new player would be like, okay, should I spend a week prepping my adventure? All the NPCs, the monsters, learning the rules, memorizing my player characters. My usual answer is, it's better to prepare more rather than less, especially when you're first starting out. But you will feel that frustration because your players are going to throw you for a curveball that you did not prepare for every single time. So you'll think you've prepared as well as you could, and you've covered all your bases, and you're going to be like, you can go north, they can go right, they can go left, and they'll be like, are there any ladders anywhere? So we want to go up or down. And so you'll be like, damn it. You answer yes too fast, and you're like, I did not prep for that. And so with time, you'll get to learn how to improvise, how to make stuff up on the fly, and especially if you've got, some material with you that, you've pre-read, or you've, watched a movie, or played in someone else's campaign, you'd be able to draw on quick ideas. And when players say, I have a hard time, thinking quickly on my feet, if someone has an improv troupe, a local improv troupe in their town, that's something I suggest joining as well, because it allows you to kind of come up with, really quick rebuttals and quick lines and replies, doing voices and things like that kind of really embellish your ability to present a world to your players.
And when Andrew and I were working on the Ethically Asked thing that we're just released and we're still working on, we put little taglines in, like the one-line thing of what the merchant looks like. And then if he has famous sayings that he resorts to all the time, well, does that bother you? Or should I offer you more? Or something, and he says that every 5 seconds, write it down. So you don't have to remember it and you will learn your own weaknesses and strengths. In the good old days, Gary used to say, your dungeon master should spend 3 hours of design time for every 1 hour of playing time.
Ouch.
And I would think, Gary, some of us have jobs. So then I found myself spending 7 hours of design time because I was taking care of that problem of the ladders, by just designing a whole world, because I already had it going for a decade before D&D, so I thought I had it's different when you're actually designing for a role-playing game, because when you're a director of a TV show or a movie, or if you're a writer putting prose out, you can decide when the players come out of a door and there's a street to the left and right, you decide which way they go. So therefore you can have false fronts of all the buildings along the street. You can't do that for role-playing, because they're going to go to the building you didn't want them to go to, and they're going to, so you have to have it designed. So I was just trying to out-design my players' reach. Unless you're as crazy as I am, or manage to get away with as little sleep as I do, you will not win this battle. Do not try it that way. The shortcuts are to buy somebody else's, and just use it.
Yep.
But also, if you have a hard time with certain things at the table, like character names, making up new ones, that's where you invest a few idle hours. Defraud your employer, do it at work. Just remembering, no, because this isn't really defrauding, it's everyone who crosses your path. Assign their name, if you like the sound, or a part of their real world name, jot it down.
Or their nickname.
Yeah.
That you give them in your head.
Yeah. Oh, it's Big Nose, Biggest Dickus, whatever, And that leads me to the next tiny sub-point is every game master should have writing implements handy at all times. I have pouches full of them. That's why I wear these cargo pants, in order to carry around all the shit I need to carry around to function as an adult in society. But that, for me, includes, my father used to say years ago, this is long before the internet and so on, you might catch a writer naked and in the bath, but you will not catch that naked in the bath writer without a pencil and paper within reach. Because an idea might come, and it had to be jotted down. Same thing, when you're around the gaming table, if you give an innkeeper or a tavern master a name, jot it down.
Yep.
Because
they will ask you.
Yeah. 8 years later,
Yep.
in real time at the gaming table, they go, so it's the same tavern master? You go, yeah, it is. And is his name still? And then they'll stop
And then wait.
trying to catch you.
Yep, that's the player's job.
Yeah. And your job is to give them such a realistic setting, because, Tazarkan he looked ill last time. He's not here now, but somebody who looks suspiciously like a younger version of him is wiping glasses behind the bar. It might be his son. Just ask. And then they, oh, geez, this is more realistic. You've increased the realism. And they haven't caught you out, so they haven't pulled out of the game into a metagaming situation. They're getting more immersed, and you want everything you want should immerse them more.
Yeah, when you mentioned going right or left in a city, cities are not probably the best place you want to start out as a brand new GM, because there's just too many places for them to go. So start out with dungeon crawls, where you can actually control the player's options, and then as you get more and more experience, you open up into cities. That brings me to another point that comes up pretty often, is where a GM says, okay, for this quest, there's point A to point B to point C on this quest, and at point B they need to find this MacGuffin. And they need to deliver it to point C, and I've placed the MacGuffin here in the city, or here in the room. And now it becomes this point-and-click exercise of the players pointing around and trying to find the item, and the GM sitting there all frustrated going, just open the drawer. It's the second drawer next to the bed, And the players are getting all frustrated because they've, opened everything but the second drawer next to the bed, right? So one of the tricks is, wherever they look, that's where the MacGuffin's gonna be. Right? So you teleport it to wherever it needs to be, because if you ever watched a movie, it never stalls out the plot where everyone's kind of just, I don't know where to go next.
Pacing matters.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that, if there's a clue that needs to be found for the story to continue, not an optional clue. An optional clue you can keep definitely as a side thing. But if the story needs to continue and this clue needs to be found to the story to continue, you make sure it's there. And if they are even going in the opposite direction, you have an arrow, hit one of them in the back with the scroll wrapped around the arrow. Let's go.
Because game masters are nothing if not subtle.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think at this point, maybe we'll open up the Q&A.
Sure, yeah.
What do you think?
So on what you were saying, I've actually read a couple of books that suggest if you go to some point where they expect to need to find something, let's say there are 3 houses that they can interact with. One of them has the item. The other 2 at least have maybe a couple of clues that kind of point at the last place. So at least if they go off the path, you're giving them a chance to learn something to point them to where they need to go next.
As long as they find the other clues and don't spend an hour trying to find the other
Right,
clues.
and you make them reasonably easy to find. Something sitting out in the open that suggests,
Reasonably easy? Is life reasonably easy? Come on.
well, it depends on the kind of game you're running, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would also say in that case, I would not miss a chance to put other really catchy adventure hooks in those other 2 houses, so they can get diverted off on a side tangent, or they'll say, "Hey, when we're finished this, we got to come back, because if this lady's missing 6 matching black opals, they got to be somewhere." So
Sure.
you're planting adventure seeds, and that used to be one of the early design rules. When TSR was developing the Forgotten Realms, Jeff Grubb, who was the First Realms Traffic Club cop, his first rule was don't blow up the moon. As in, your adventure should not kill a king without our editorial permission. It should not start a major war between 2 empires without our permission. Just do not go there. Do not blow up the moon. My first rule was, for every loose end that I've written into the Forgotten Realms from the old gray box, that you tie off, use up, burn in an adventure, I need 3 new ones.
Mhm.
I need the world to feel alive around the players, so if the players sit down and do nothing except drink for, a week, the world will roll on and events will happen without them. The setting will feel more real, and they will be more invested in living in it if it is not a lifeless backdrop. You do not want it to be a soundstage where nothing happens until the players are on stage. You want it to be a living world that they are just part of.
And it gives them a sense of urgency too. So if they're not going to do it, maybe someone else is going to do it. A rival warband, a rival group of adventurers, and maybe their agenda is counter to your player characters. So at that point, it's like, okay, you can't just sit around in the tavern and take your long rests.
I've introduced, like for a party, I've introduced a rival that
Mhm.
if you're not going to do it, these other guys, and over time I've fostered a hatred of that rival team. Not a hatred that'll burst out into the 2 teams fighting it off, but those guys are pretty good too. So if we don't get
Sure.
it done in time,
Yeah.
and sometimes if they don't move fast enough, the other team knocks off that particular
Perfect.
thing, and you're like, and they're all toasting themselves at the bar, and you're like, guys, we could have done this.
Yeah, it could have been ours.
Could
Yeah.
have been ours.
Yeah.
So,
That's good.
and that's part of making it feel like a living world, that there are other teams out there. There's competition.
Yep. Yeah, you never want your player characters to feel like they are the prime movers of everything in this world. That's fatal, because then they get swelled heads and they think they can have a political party or start a bank or something like that.
Or hold your adventure hostage.
Yes.
I saw a hand go up there.
Yeah, how do you get better at improv?
Okay, everything in the world you get better at by doing it more often. The worst thing is to be afraid of doing something and to avoid it, or knowing you're not good at it and you're shy and awkward, of just not doing it as a result. The best saxophone player in the world is walking around not knowing that they're the best, because they've never picked up a saxophone. Okay, try everything. And for goodness sake, if you're embarrassed or you feel some trepidation about being embarrassed in public doing crazy things, why are you in role playing? That's what we do. I was notorious in my first library job for continually borrowing the feather duster and sticking it down my pants to be a tail and going, "Oh, time to leave the the library, and which got a lot more attention from all the people who were sitting there reading the newspaper and trying to finish doing the crossword puzzle that they hadn't paid for and ruin it for everybody else before closing time. But they sure paid attention to me, you know. And there's like a crazy guy. Yeah, we know. If you want to get away from the crazy guy, you should leave. We can't control him. We've never been able to control him. Really? Should I call the police? No. He is one. You know, and you see, you do all that sort of stuff, and you'll get better at it. There are some things for improv, like you can practice, but it's mainly practice doing it over and over again. And you will know whether your own players are comfortable with over-the-top Monty Python voices, you know, or whether that they just get terribly embarrassed, or they can't, with their vocal cords, do the penguin on top of your TV is about to explode! You know, maybe they can't do that, and don't force them into it. You don't need to be the equivalent of Critical Role or your favorite Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
You don't need to be as good acting. You can be ham actors, or you can say, I'm not comfortable trying to do the Dwarf King's accent, so I'll just say, that's fine.
But I think you were saying being quick on your feet
Yeah.
in terms of response, right? So that comes down to also the preparation. If you can end up having a couple of like NPCs already pre-written in your little NPC side book, that if you need one, just, you know, a shopkeeper that they decide to interrogate, where are you going after work? You know, are you going drinking somewhere? And then you can end up just flipping to an NPC you haven't used before. You've got some characteristics there, like, you know, they walk with a limp, and, you know, they've got a lisp when they speak, and they seem to always look behind them when they walk down the street. And so you've got a little bit, something personalized that you can add without having to think of it right there on the spot. And so build yourself a little NPC booklet, and I think there's more and more Kickstarters right now that are coming out with these kinds of aids, these books for these exact things. So, which is fantastic.
And years ago, my dad was a university prof, and he said, "Oh, son, are you going to start cramming for exams and then putting it in your butt the night before instead of paying attention all the way?" And I said, "Dad, I have a job, and I'm in journalism. We have to write stories, whether they're fake or real, every day. I don't have time to do all this shit." And he said, "Okay, well, here's my trick. Write down your cheat sheet, which you are not going to take into the exam. Take yourself off in private somewhere, go downstairs to the den and close the door, and teach an imaginary class. And if you can teach the class through all those things, then you understand it well enough to articulate it, and you've memorized it well enough, and give yourself a black mark every time you have to look down at your cheat sheet when you're teaching the imaginary class. Well, you can do the same thing if it comes to, you're going to have an important speech, like, say, the princess is going to tell one of your player characters it's over between them and they never had a chance with her anyway, you schmuck. Or the king is going to give them an order: leave my kingdom now and do not come back until you have the left testicle of the dragon. Otherwise, I never want to see you again. This sort of thing. If it's going to come to a difficult speech, just go off before the play session by yourself with writing implements. Don't write the speech, because that's homework again. Just improv the speech to the wall, not to an audience. And keep trying it over and over again until you've got some phrases that sound good, like you're a speechwriter for Winston Churchill, or an American president you respect, if there are any. Just give a speech, and then when you come up with phrases you really like, just jot them down in point form. These are the zinger lines I'm going to put in my speech. And then when it's gaming table time, you pull out that list from underneath the maps and the stat sheet, and you just give the speech, because you're already practice in improving it, and then you just look down, hey, I'm going to check my cheat sheet. And maybe the king, you just make it a characteristic of the king that he can't remember his speeches without checking his notes. I remember the Amadeus, where the king had a catchphrase, so there you are. because he didn't know what else to say. Okay, so have your king. You'll have to leave my kingdom. Because you are a disturbing influence. You just make it characteristic of that character, and it will be far more. Unless every single character, every single ABC. You must leave my bar immediately because you are a disturbing influence to my daughter. That one. That's not
There's
going
something in the water.
Yeah. Oh yes, that gives them the
Yes,
Innsmouth look.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I mean, it is quite okay to cheat, to practice beforehand. That's how you get better at improv.
Yeah.
And just the more you do something, you may not get better at it, but it'll be easier for you to do.
And it's better than reading it out to the players, because that's one of the things also.
God,
New
yeah.
players will be saying, I looked down at the module, I read 10 paragraphs for my players, when I looked up, they were all sleeping.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they tuned out, and I asked them questions, they didn't retain anything. So it's always better to summarize whatever's written in adventures, like read this to your players, read it beforehand, summarize it in your own words. Your players will be a lot more engaged than you just.
And I
reading it to
know
them.
this works because I was the shyest kid ever. I couldn't even meet people in the eye without blushing and looking away. And my father said, look, you're sharing this planet with other human beings. You have to get along with them. I want you to go out there and make a public speech from the stage. And I said, Dad, I'm going to die. He goes, go ahead, walk out there, pee yourself, throw up all over the stage. Don't worry, I'll clean up afterwards, but you're making that speech. And it's like, but Dad, and he goes, no, there's no buts. Just do it. You'll be terrible at it. Don't worry about that. Accept that at the beginning. You're going to fuck it up. Just go and do it anyway. And then you get better at it, or you at least get more used to it. You can still end up being really bad at giving speeches, but you no longer go, I can't go out on that stage. You go, oh, I have to go out on the stage and do it. And the world is going to do that to you. Like, it's going to say, you have to do your taxes every year at this time. It's not going to say, oh, are you bad at doing taxes? Well, you don't have to. No, it's not going to do that. So you just, anything you're not good at, try it. And try different ways of doing it. And try it over and over again. You'll get better at it. And you'll also know what you're good at and what you aren't good at, like the funny voices or the not, or do you want to do full acting? Are you going to do method acting? What's my motive? Or are you going, what the hell? Because there are different ways of doing it. Find your own way. And the real delight is if you find a playing group that it's also their best way. So that instead of thinking, our dungeon master is a bit weird, every time he makes chicken noises, sticks the feather duster. Or instead it's like, hey, we brought you a feather duster because we noticed yours is getting a bit moth-eaten,
Was that a hand? No? Okay.
I have an NPC trick I can pass on. It works for me. When I'm writing up a list of NPCs that they may encounter, I get it's in a Word document or some electronic document. Copy paste an image of someone, a character or an actor that's going to be the inspiration for that character. So I'm running wealthy, flighty patron. I've got Jeff Goldblum's character from the movie, and then whatever the character's name is in the setting, and
This was their pleasure. Nobody touched it.
right. I'm channeling Jeff Goldblum as I'm talking to the piece of data. So, if you guys are, you can't help but channel that flighty, silly character who then runs away but leaves you enough money to run your business, right?
That's a good idea.
I've been doing that same one for years.
Yeah.
So, doing prep and dealing with the game, that's only half of what we do at the table as the GM. The other half is unfortunately sat across from us, trying to ruin our well-laid plans. So, when you're dealing with, problem players, that, they're not bad people. You don't want to kick them out. But let's say you've got some players that they're disruptive a little bit, or maybe they go off the rails like you're trying to run a serious Call of Cthulhu game, and they're like, oh, let's make some jokes and liven up the mood because I'm in stressful situation here. How do you sort of bring them back to focusing on the task at hand and encouraging them to, if you're feeling stressed, that's good. That's what I'm after.
Yeah, contribute.
Yeah.
'Cause that's,
Give them
that's-
something to do.
But I would reinforce that everyone at the table, this is a collaborative experience. It's not, I've
Us
shown up,
Yeah.
entertain me, GM.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
this is a group sport, right? So everyone's sitting around the table, and just remind your players that everyone gets out of the experience what everyone puts into the experience. So if they signed up for a Call of Cthulhu game and they want to walk away going, wow, that was a really creepy session, I might have nightmares tonight. Well, if people are throwing, Monty Python gags all night long, well, you're not going to get that out of the evening, right? So just remind the players they're going to get what they put in out of the session. And a lot of times they'll check themselves and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's true. So they're going to readjust their focus because they're going to realize, if I'm not putting in what I'm doing and the next guy isn't doing it, then we all suffer at the end of the session.
And unless you do have to step out of character to talk player to game master or player to player, encourage everything said around the table to be in character. So the characters plan a war council in character. They talk to each other.
And they name each other by
Yeah.
the characters
The
rather
character
than their actual names.
Yeah, you want the immersion to be, and because if everybody is immersed and they like what's going on, that will cut down on the problem behavior because they don't want this thing to end. They don't want it to be ruined. They are now invested in what's going on.
So I was a nerd jock all through high school, mega nerd, but then also played sports. So my coaching background with the practice thing you're talking about, deliberate practice is one of the things I do. Is I purposely set myself up to fail in situations where I suck at, like legendary actions. I just always forget about legendary actions, layer actions. So, all right, cool. I'm making a combat with two creatures with both legendary actions, and I know I'm going to screw it up, but I'm way better now. Or improv, where I will drive in the car and talk to myself, because who listens to music? I would just rather role play a character. And I'll be like, what would happen if the players did this with this character? What would Strahd say if they did this? And then go. And I immediately just start talking as Strahd, and like, what did they do? Oh, well, now, like, whatever. So.
And to amplify that, if you know you have something that's going to be difficult,
Yeah.
pre-prepare and write yourself little notes and cheat sheets and helps. Lawrence Tibbett, who was a famous opera singer, started his career as a walk-on understudy when somebody got ill, and he didn't know the opera. He had the voice, but he didn't know the lyrics. And literally, they taped lyrics on the backsides of the fake cacti on stage. They put spear carriers that weren't in the original blocking for that scene, but were in the opera. They had to walk on and walk in front of him, holding lines for the scene so he could read off of them because he was trying to sing his way through something he didn't know. You can do that to yourself if you come into a difficult thing. Oh, I'm going to write down the names of the 5 noble families.
I got beads. I got
Yeah.
I got 3 red beads and 3 black beads,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
And legendary actions have little
Yeah.
coins when
Yeah.
you use them.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
remind you, like physical.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
some people are very visual, right?
Yeah.
And tactile, right? So have something as a physical representation on the table that will remind you, and then when you change its state, you've done it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Play to your strengths and look at your weaknesses and either change what's going to happen at the gaming table to avoid those weaknesses, which of course is the easy way out, but is limiting because you're continually going up against roadblocks and saying, oh no, we'll go this way. Or confront your weaknesses and play them through, work them through, get practice at dealing with them, and it'll be better. So far we're making this sound like terrible. It's like exercising.
I'm giving you guys homework.
Yeah.
That's why it's a masterclass.
Yeah.
You guys are taking notes, right?
Yeah.
A test at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, so you should practice everything. So if you have to murder kings, well, make a list, get on the airplane and start going. If it's seducing princesses, same thing, but you won't need to take the dagger.
Yeah.
So I'll transition that into a question on a different topic. Is one of the first things you said was like players interweaving their backstories together so that they feel a little bit more together. What is y'all's best way of doing that? Because I've done things like, okay, come up with some way you're connected to the player to your left and the player to your right. And it adds a little bit of shake up, but is there any tips y'all guys have?
Well, you're in the same prison cell. No,
Why
no,
are you there?
that's the unsubtle way. Okay, if you're from the same physical location, your starting village, or someone, you could have family connections. Even though you've never met each other, you know that so-and-so's family is the Miller's family. And you always envied the Miller, because he must be bloody rich, because everybody has to take their stuff to the mill. And you discover that the fellow player character that you're rubbing shoulders with is the third son, and has been kicked out into the world to fend for himself, because the Miller is in danger of losing the mill. He can't afford to. Oh, you didn't know that before. And you can also do things that have to do not just with their families, but with what is going on politically and socially and monetarily in the setting.
So I would add to that by saying that there are a tremendous amount of indie RPGs now with the advent of Kickstarter that have incredible life path systems that include how to generate interconnections between players and relationships that are both synergistic but also have almost shared goals for these like quests, like instead of personal quests, shared quests between players, so they can actually work together and try to advance their personal quest.
Can you name one of these? Because
So like I think it was Blades in the Dark, like a lot of the Apocalypse World stuff, Fate, Masks, like the stuff built off of Fate. So a lot of those more narrative-based ones where it's less about the numbers and more about the story. A lot of those RPGs will really put a strong focus on the relationships between all of the characters. So Apocalypse World and Fate I would say those are the two big umbrella systems that would have those kinds of systems. And even before that, before I even knew there was a life path system in an RPG, what we used to do way back in the day is we would just crack open a dictionary and just put a finger down on a word, and we would just use that word as the relationship between two characters. And so it would just completely random. So we'd have to just completely brainstorm some sort of relationship based on addiction. You know?
And
It leads us in-
you could also set up an artificial thing at the beginning when they're getting together where they have to cooperate to get something. Like perhaps their village is flooding, and everybody knows, well, we could go to the old witch. So if somebody goes to the old witch and she's not there, the hut is empty. And they're searching frantically for the old witch. Maybe she can divert the water, and you bump into each other, sent by your parents and their parents to do the same thing. Well, and you don't even know what the old witch looks like. The other guy does. But he doesn't know the terrain too well because he never goes up and, okay, now you gotta help each other. And now you're already falling into helping each other.
I just thought of a couple more. Monster Hearts, and then there's Smallville. There are quite a few. Yep.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, to build on that too, if you haven't taken a look at the new Avatar PvP game, like theirs is actually really cool that at their like tap system locks directly into how each of the class actually operates mechanically. It's pretty cool. The other cool one, if anybody wanted to check it out, that I did recently is Patrick Stewart's latest book, the Heathen on Sarcophagus, has this like big map that you let the players like draw like sort of like lines between, and then where they cross, you ask them like how they cross paths.
That's cool.
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
You
Yeah,
can
there are a
make
lot of
that yourself
creative.
with, like, tricks and just like stuff like that.
Yep, in front.
If you are building like a homebrew world for your players to play in, is there such a thing as too much world building, and like, or is there such a thing as too much? Too much detail, as in like the same thing can happen with a backstory. If you give too much detail, you work yourself into a corner. Can you do the same
I want to hear
thing?
Ed's answer.
No, there is no such thing as too much world building. However, there is such a thing as not using your time wisely when you don't have enough of it. The number one pitfall I see in world building to start a campaign is long, detailed timelines and histories of stuff that has gone before. And who gives a rat's ass in most cases? The exceptions are answering that question of why now? Like if Smaug is sitting on this pile of gold, why didn't someone take it last week or last month or 2 years ago? Why is it still there for your player characters right now? You have to answer those little questions. But beyond that, we can get by on a little shorthand. Now, there are other things you can do in world building, and that's to start, particularly if your player characters at the beginning are not the most mobile, and they're from the same village or town or port or wherever. Set the beginning of your adventures, the base, when they go home to heal, when they're not going down the dungeon or exploring the ruined castle on the outskirts, like a sitcom, in that you have support characters. And the support characters, like the innkeeper, the tavern master, the miller, but maybe there'll be somebody who is older and they can go to for advice, who's the local expert, who can tell you why that person, the miller, never talks to the tavern master and never goes to the tavern. There's some bad blood between them. Why? Did they fight over the same gal 30 years ago? Or is it something more interesting in terms of an adventure possibility? And so you answer a few little things like that for yourself and do that instead of making the timeline. So yeah, you can do too much world building that doesn't advance your play possibilities, or that is so extensive it starts to handcuff the collaborative storytelling that Andrew was talking about earlier, where you're telling a story together and you need to give the players their chance to add to the unfolding story, not say, no, that doesn't fit the script. Let me tell you, nobody wants to sit and listen to the game master read the great unpublished fantasy novel that is great and unpublished because it's execrable.
Yes, at the beginning of time.
Yeah.
The world was created. And,
In a world!
But one of the shortcuts you could do if you are creating your own world and you have grand aspirations to have, a pantheon, creation myths, many kingdoms and whatnot, one of the quick shortcuts is just base it on our history. Yeah. We have so many centuries and locations across the globe that you can grab any kind of culture and say, I'm going to use these kingdoms from this time period with their sociology, their religion, their gods as a jumping off point. And then you can easily say, everything that's written about that time period is canon in my universe, but then I will add to that. I will add more. And that's kind of what we did with the Fate of Norn's universe, is we took 10th century, Viking Age, and we started there, and then we built off of that. That was kind of the nugget, and everything was built around that.
So, I understand the idea of like trying something even if you know you might not succeed at it. But what happens when, as a GM, like, are there any strategies you have for like getting yourself out of that situation if like you don't, if like you try something and you're just really not good at it? Like,
Nobody expects a Spanish Inquisition. No, you can interrupt the situation as you find yourself sinking into the quicksand with something else, dramatic and sudden. And to do that, it really helps if you pre-prepared one or two things that you can. And in the old Realms campaign, there'd be this annoying vendor, the peanuts, popcorn, equivalent, who would just wander through the middle of a fight in the dungeon. Again and again and again, totally oblivious. And I actually snuck that into Spellfire. There's an early scene where there's like battle is about to happen, and you see Flora and Helminster, and they're strolling along talking, and Florin's going, as he sees the two forces, and Elminster is just totally oblivious because, yeah, I can take care of both of them, so I'm not going to pay any attention. It's more important that we have this discussion. And Florence going, and they just walk straight through and back out of the book again. And that's one of the, you can do that. And you, yeah.
Go ahead. But is there a specific question? I almost feel like there's a specific scenario that you have.
Combat. I keep trying different systems, and I'm really bad at it, no matter what I try.
So, what's the least crunchy system that you've tried? With the least amount of rules, because I mean, you can get into almost just storytelling systems.
I think the least last one was Tension, where it's just like it's like a cinematic movie, and you just like give players describe actions, and then they do that action, and it resolves, and then you just kind of go determine like each player is shaping kind of the battle as they go, instead of doing like gritty like points, armor, and just doing like, oh, you hit the monster, you did this. But like that's a little too light.
What? Yeah, what Andrew is saying about storytelling, that's usually the key. Try the storytelling and see if you're comfortable with it and your players like it. I mean, I used to run sessions for non-role players because I work in a public library, and I would always have a mother. What is my child gaming? I'm gonna go and see what this is, and in certain communities, they bring along a minister, you know, because this is dangerous satanic stuff. So you'd end up with a bunch of people who were mildly hostile and didn't understand anything. And they'd say, oh, it's fighting time. It's fighting time. The guard is drawing his sword and he's glaring at you. What are you doing this round? 1, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And they go, okay, we'll get back to you. What are you doing this round? Okay, now everybody realizes, oh, there's going to be a time thing. And I'd be saying, because he's striding forward and that sword is graded out and he's looking at you. What are you doing this round? 10, 9, and they oh, so I'm creating urgency by it, but it's
still storytelling.
It's still storytelling.
And it sounds like you are doing just fine with the non-combat narrative storytelling, right? So when there's skill checks, when someone is doing an omen's importance like an augury, you have no problems telling them what they see. If they're crafting something, you have no problems there. So it sounds like you just need a system where it's a unified mechanic for everything. So whether it's a combat or a craft or something else, if you're okay with everything else, if combat's handled the same way with one unified mechanic, then you can transition into combat seamlessly and transition out of it seamlessly. And that might be a system you want to try.
And if the person isn't quite sure about how to cast the spell that they have memorized or on their lists or in their spell book, and you say, oh, we'll get back to you at the end of the round. You know, use that time wisely. So they're reading the spell and everything, and then they realize, if I'm ready, I know my target, I'm ready to cast the spell, and I know what damage it does, the GM is going to take me right now but if I'm not ready, it's going to happen at the end of the turn or the end of the combat round or whatever, and then they learn themselves, oh, I've got to be ready, or it's going to happen at the end. Sometimes they want it to happen at the end, or they want to buy themselves that time, and that's okay, but you're already making combat that is a little more exciting. The pacing, remember we were talking earlier about pacing, we're keeping the pacing up, and we're trying to avoid the 5e trap of, hey, we've had a combat. That's 2 hours of our life we won't have back. And we're going to have to interrupt in the middle because every single person at the table is going to have to go to the bathroom and pee because it's been like 2 hours.
And it's so long between turns, no one's ready when their turn comes around.
And the other thing is, like Andrew said earlier about, move the MacGuffins so it's always in their way for pacing. If it's something simple, like there's 6 of you and there's 1 guard, you're going to kill the guard. Let's just see if the guard has time to cry out before. So what are you going to do? And one of them will say, I'm gonna slap my hand across his mouth. Okay, so you do that, and you lower his lifeless body to the ground, and he hasn't. No, we didn't want to kill him. Okay, so what are you doing to him instead? See, and you've taken care of the combat that quickly and moved on.
And
Because-
another,
yeah.
and another question would be, how does the combat fit into your story? It sounds also that you're very much also story driven. So is it just a random encounter that doesn't contribute to the story, or does that fight actually have an impact on the story, the outcome? Is there a significant villain that's getting defeated, or are the players getting delayed in their quest because of this fight? That's another question in terms of throwing fights into a system that might be really slow with fights that just derail the entire evening. Like you hear initiative, you're like, okay, the evening's done. So you have to be really choosy then in terms of making the fights important, rather than, okay, you're gonna fight 16 goblins and that's gonna take 2 hours, but there's really no impact whether you win or lose this fight. It's just 2 hours wasted. I don't think we had a question.
One question, perhaps a suggestion for you: do you want your games to have combat? Is there games that don't have it?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
They have
I
to
like
play
the
solve problems
option of combat, but the option of working around it. So I present players with like, you see a monster in the hall, but also you see that there's like a vent you can climb through if you want to sneak through.
Mhm.
Do you want to, or there's like a bottle back there, do you want to distract it and then run by, or do you want to fight it? So I try to give options
Mm-hmm.
of like, how do you approach the situation? And I kind of like leave it to the players to decide how they proceed to engage this potential threat.
It's
And
very
then
good.
I kind of let them decide, and that way they decide. I'm not forcing them into combat, but you know, it's like if they really wanna, they're really raring to fight. There's a monster.
Yep.
Tell them about social combat. Tell them about social combat.
Yeah.
She'll prepare you.
So,
you wouldn't remember if they choose, like trophy gold.
so yeah, if you're on the path of mentioning alternative systems, one of the things that we've built into Fate of the Norns Ragnarok is social combat. And that is another way to have a crunchy encounter with character sheets that have powers and abilities and especially unique things to do in a tense situation. And you get to roll dice or draw runes, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to draw a sword and kill somebody. So there are some systems that are out there that, without having to get into lethal combat, you can have crunchy mechanics around a social situation as well, and that might be something you're looking for as well. So those options are
That
there.
you're blackmailing somebody, or you're intimidating them, or you're persuading them with your great arguments. You know, the old thing that, the cliche thing is, beautiful tavern you've got here. You pity if something happened to you. You know.
I was a playtester for GURPS Social Engineering. There's like a whole book of just social stuff you can be doing.
I was just gonna interject to her question there too. The group that I run is very story driven, and it's one of the things I learned early on as a new DM was there are consequences to both your inactions and your inactions. And as soon as I explained that to them, it seemed like all the light bulbs went on, and they went, "Oh, if we don't lose that rock, perhaps we don't figure out where the trap is disarmed," or whatever the situation was. But that was a thing I learned early on, is there's consequences for not doing something too.
Mhm.
It served me very well as I'll use the word junior DM. I was like kind of lived by that rule, and it seemed to work out pretty well.
Yeah, player agency, but with the different options having different outcomes.
Of course, yes.
On the do you play D&D fifth edition at all?
No, I have
Okay.
tried it, and
Okay.
I just can't get into it.
Well, right. So my overall concept was also like the systems and the combat crunches that take 2 hours and stuff. Is like skill challenges in D&D is a great example of like, you just want to roll dice and everybody goes around the table, you each roll something, add something, let's tell that story. And the dice at the table, and then you tell the story and move on, instead of like combat or turn after turn. But then also in the aspect of like, if you're struggling with something, a lot of times I'll tell my players like, all right, look, I suck at character voices, so I'm going to do some character voices and they're going to be terrible. So I apologize in advance, so that if you like let people know that they can also help with like condition markers or combat to help you track the stuff. So your party can help you too, I think.
Good point. Yep, over there.
Random encounters. one thing I've always questioned, trying to figure out, like I do Icewind Dale, or I'm in a city of Neverwinter or Waterdeep, for example. How do you make them, like I want to make them feel the city and feel the nature, feel that trek too, because that's the adventure part. I feel like you're not just skipping over it and like, oh, now you're there. Oh, there was one random encounter. But how is there a way that you use whatever system? Because I don't mind adopting any other systems, but to make it more like, wow, amazing! This is like Jurassic Park coming into the park. You know, something like that. Or going to the city and you're like, this is going to be interesting. You know.
Well, it depends on the system, right? So we were talking about this in yesterday's panel. If the system is built for combat, unfortunately, when you look at the adventure or the stat blocks, everything's got like hit points, armor class, what weapon they're wielding. So all of a sudden, you're kind of funneling everyone into, okay, we're going to have initiative. The only way out of this is through a fight. But if you're with a system that actually has characteristics, personalities, names, dirty secrets that they have, this goblin camp now just became a lot more interesting. You stumble into it, all of a sudden you've got other options. They're talking, you can overhear maybe a conversation about something they just did. They robbed some evil necromancer, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, these guys might not be evil then. And it just kind of turns things around. Instead of being this cut and dry black and white world, all of a sudden your world becomes a lot more nuanced, more gray. And that's probably what you're looking for in those encounters, to tell a story rather than it's a random encounter to just burn some time, swing some swords, and kill some stuff and loot some stuff. So if you make it a little bit grayer and then add those attributes that have story elements in that encounter rather than just stat blocks for combat, I think that'll change the dynamic of your random encounters.
And there's a cute little one cut line thing that gets used a lot in screenwriting. In this scene, what does this character want? What are they trying to get right now in the short term, and what's their long-term goal?
You talking about protagonists, or are you talking about people?
Anybody, any NPC. And in the same way, if you're having a random encounter with a merchant on the streets of Neverwinter, or you're in Dock Ward and two drunks come out of an alleyway, and as you two block your path, and you realize they're feigning drunk. They're not really drunk, and they're looking at you. Then the one line of why are they here, and what do they want to do, and why did you randomly encounter them if it really was random? But why are they here, and what are they trying to do while they're here, or are they trying to get somewhere else in a hurry and you're in the way, or whatever. So you just write that down, and it makes the encounter more interesting, and it gives you more guidance as a GM as to how to resolve it. Yeah, and also it ties it to the setting. These are dwarves from Mirabar who have been cutting gems for 20 days straight, and they are out for the world's biggest bender, which they have every month at this time. And then already that fits into the setting a little bit more.
And this is what Ed has been doing at Athcliath with all of those characters that you meet in the city. There's 3 attributes that each one of them gets on top of everything else: the proclivity, the dirty secret, and their characteristic, which all of a sudden now tells a story about that character rather than just a stat block to beat.
Yeah, those 3 put together gives you what the character looks like and how they speak, what their interests are. Do they have hobbies? In any situation dealing with a stranger, like, say, the player characters, what will they be out for? Oh, I gotta find out more about these people, because every single one of them is a potential target. And then the third thing, the dirty secret, is what you use in the social combat, because if you can learn their dirty secret, you can blackmail them, or compel them, or, it'd be a pity if I told the king's tax collectors about that, and then suddenly, sort of thing. So that gives you a handle, and for us, we've done the GM's prep work, so you can just pick it up and run it. Now, the other nice thing about, if you find what we've written, or somebody else's where they've done that, just pluck that out and use it. Like for other characters, file off the names, put it in another situation. Somebody else has already done your scut work for you, and you can just use that so you can concentrate on your adventure as it unfolds, not in, oh, what's my motivation? You know, for every NPC. Because somebody else has already done it, so you just take it and use it. But if there's something that doesn't fit with the setting, well, you're gonna have to rewrite that one line. Or it's gonna have to be somebody who just stumbled off a starship or through a portal from somewhere else. And they might be trying to get home. That might be their number one. And they're bewildered and they're gonna be aggressive because they're frightened, because they don't know where they are and they don't know how to get home. And everybody is immediately more trepidatious in those situations than if they're on their home turf and they know supper's waiting and it's part of the routine and who is this weirdo stranger in town? You know, because they feel confident they're on their home ground. Which is, you know, if you play Ravenloft or other horror games, the number one thing that GM is trying to do is take away that reassuring ground that the people stand on to plunge them into this situation of
Uncertainty. Yeah.
It's got tentacles. Well, of course it's got tentacles.
You keep a big book of this, don't you? Like all your NPCs?
No.
Do you keep like a data card thing? Like
I've got a big book right here. But yes, you
Yeah.
should. I don't need the big book because I've been doing it for 55 years. But no, yes. Have cue cards. You know, like recipe cards. They're real cheap these days because most people don't write down
It's all
recipes
digital.
anymore. It's all digital. But they still sell the cards in stationery shops. Grab them cheap and start using them. Seriously.
All right. How are we on time check? What time is this panel in?
In 20 minutes?
Okay. More questions?
Yes. Aha!
How did you build your world? And like, is there anything that really you started with?
I started it with a vision. No, no. I you know, I had this. It was kindergarten. I was grade 5, and it was like a decade before D&D. And I had this vision of a silver-haired lady harping in snowy woods at night with all the beasties watching her, and her harping alone at a little campfire. And her silver hair was like flowing like tentacles in time to the music, attracted another silver-haired woman who looked very much like her out to listen to her harping, and I had to know who these two people were, and it was Storm and Dud. So that's where it started for me. But then I started building a setting by following Mert the moneylender from Port City to Port City, and that a year later I learned it was the Sword Coast, and a year later he reached. A year later, I figured I was in the Forgotten Realms and why it was called the Forgotten Realms, and that was about the time that Mert fetched up in Waterdeep and figured it was dirty enough and big enough that it could hold him, and he didn't have to travel from Port City to Port City anymore. And that's actually a short way of saying this is what I did, not knowing what I was doing, but I was building it from a protagonist's viewpoint, just looking at what was around them, and as they moved, we got to see more of the world. And that's a good way to do it if you're world building, rather than trying to do it. The Earth cooled. There were 46 continents. This was 18 centuries ago. Let me tell you what happened in those 18 centuries, because I'm sure you want to know. And everybody in them is dead except the dragons, so none of this matters now anyway. But it matters to me. That is not the way to build a world unless you have 55 years like I was voiced. Spent.
What about the one method where you make a small area, like a couple of towns, and you roll some dice, and different dice are different things, like mountains, rivers, and stuff, and you only focus on one of the towns, and that way you can just say, that there's another town up there.
There's a problem with that method. The dice don't know the rules of geography, like, you know, water flows downhill, stuff like that, and you may end up with a very weird looking map. Now, in some cases that can be excused. Like, we tend to give Tolkien a pass for having Mordor down in a corner with these 3 straight walls around it. You sort of look at it and go, yeah, right. But You can use random die rolls, but I wouldn't, because it's more fun to let the players be the random die rolls, and what they're doing once you've started play after you've built this core, the needs of the campaign. Oh, they want to get on a ship and get the hell out of here. Okay, I better have a sea, and I better have ports, and that'll allow me to put anything I want to inflict on them wherever the ship lands. They may think they're in control of the ship, but no, the winds and the wave currents and what's going to happen to the ship when the sea monsters start eating its hull so that they have to drown or get to shore in a hell of a hurry, that's going to dictate where they go. And
the tentacles.
And the tentacles, yeah.
So when doing world building and like having those options to focus on either hard or soft world building with something like plate tectonics or government or economics, let's say you had like 4 hours to come up with a place really, really quick, where do you think you'd spend most of your time? And the other part of it, you just be like, it's just something that works.
What's relevant to your story? I mean, start with the story.
Start with the story.
Exactly. So, where's your adventure going to take your characters, and then what's going to be relevant to that story? Everything else is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Absolutely irrelevant. And so that's how you prioritize it. And then after that, I mean, obviously the player's going to ask you questions, and they're going to go, the king is taxing at 100%. Why is he taxing at 100%? We want to find out. Where's that money going? Doesn't seem to be going to the services. And so all of a sudden, you've got a certain story arc that starts deviating because of certain decisions that you made with the economy, let's say, of that initial story arc. And that leads you to, the rest of your world building. But you follow it from your story arcs, where your players take you. If you're on a time crunch. If you have 55 years, you can start wherever you want.
Yeah, yeah. But don't think of your world as a huge map and a detailed setting. It is. But think of it as a toolbox with story plot elements in it that you shake up. And then you lift the lid, and you pull out the saw, and you pull out the hatchet, and you pull out the hammer. And, oh, here's what I needed. So think of it that way. It's a toolbox full of story ideas.
Yeah.
That's where your attention should be. Because the map and everything, that's cool.
But that's last.
That's last, yeah.
Yeah, when we were building Ath, we started that at the beginning of the pandemic because we couldn't go anywhere. So we're like, hey, let's build a city together. And we ended up looking at where we were in the Fate of the Norns universe and where the stories needed to be told. And we were moving out of the Viking Scandinavian realms and into the Celtic realms. And we were looking at what are the politics at play. So you've got the Gaels, you've got the Scandinavians, you've got the Fomorians rising from the sea. It's Ragnarok. We're moving from the first age into the second age of Ragnarok. So we've got a lot of these stories to tell. So we're choosing Dublin, Athcliath, in the 10th century. And then from there, we were like, okay, what are the stories within the city that we want to tell? And things like the map, the economy, the justice system, that was like months and months and months later. It was more about the people that you're going to meet there. What are their day-to-days? What are their stories? And then what kind of adventures are the players going to have there? So what are their interactions with the locals? How do we centralize a lot of interesting stories within an urban environment? Because it's a massive city. 96 city blocks.
96 city blocks.
Every single building has been described. It's crazy. And so...
And an NPC in each one, because to reiterate what we said in our earlier world building panel, a world is people, not geography. And the people, I'm not just talking the humans, the dragons, the monsters, it's the people. Because they are going to generate your stories, not a map. The map will make it obvious if two kingdoms are going to clash, and there's a strategic island with a city on it that is neutral in between them, and they're both going to want the city. Yeah, the tactical stuff, the map will help you with. But, as Andrew said, it's the last. Because you've already set up the two warring kingdoms. Oh, okay. Now you're just mapping where their borders were and what their capital cities and important ports are called. That's the last thing. And by the way, those of you who don't have any skill at drawing maps, if you can find an old Lynn Carter or a Lancer paperback in which the map was at the front of the book on a tiny paperback page, and they looked like they'd been sketched by somebody in 5 minutes, and literally they used a triangle for every settlement. And when they came to capital cities, they draw 3 triangles overlapping each other, so it looks like a lot of towers, and then they just did dotted lines as the roads between them, and then they just wrote the names of the things, and then they just do a fluffy cloud thing for a city, and little points to be mountains, and it looked like something your teacher drew in 3 seconds on the blackboard, because that's all that mattered. All they were showing you was the distance and direction.
At the beginning, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
afterwards, there's all kinds of software now.
Yeah,
You can get
yeah.
that'll do create these beautiful maps.
Yeah.
Either cityscapes or like overhead, like global, even internal like layouts of buildings and stuff. So,
But all you're doing at the beginning when you're designing is defining the relationships between these geographical features. How long does it take me to get from there to there? Or are they right next door? Are there any barriers, like a mountain range? And, you know, look with the grade, or move.
exactly. Any more questions?
Ooh, I see hands.
When running a game for a table full of other GMs, in this case, much more experienced GMs, what advice do you have for making the game still surprising and exciting? Even as regards to, if someone knows it, if this is 5e and someone knows every monster and their stats in the monster manual,
Don't use the monster manual.
Yeah, don't, or use the monster manual, but make every monster look like another monster.
Like that beholder from earlier.
Yeah. And the other, and also make them laugh. Have pratfalls.
Yeah.
You'll break the ice and move things along. And one of the things that all the players in one of our earlier Ask Goliath adventures discovered is everybody's the same underneath. They're all lazy humans just trying to get through their day or their shift, and they will walk and talk and react accordingly. So the king's soldiers in their endless patrols are going, "What's all this here? Oh, I'm a soldier of the king. I'm a sword of the king. What's your name?" "My name is Sword of the King, citizen." Or, "My name is Sword of the King, outlander." You know, it's like, I don't give you my name, you know, but underneath, when you push them, it's like, I just wanted to get to the end of the shift without somebody putting a sword through my guts. Can we just skip all this and get to the bit where I'm in the tavern over there getting drunk because I'm off the clock? Thank you very much. And you do things in understandable human ways, and you give people understandable human motivations, and you let the experienced GMs at the table feel like they have a chance to do something they've always wanted to do in a role-playing game. Like, I've always wanted to tickle a monster instead of sorting it. Or I've always wanted to talk to it. You let them know, oh, I can do that? Son of a bitch. And then they're into the adventure.
Oh yeah, forever GMs are just going to be tickled pink just to be able to play, right?
Yeah.
And the fact is, they understand where you are because they've been there, right? They've gone through that journey. And you have a unique perspective and advantage because, again, the longer you play, the more you get kind of these like blinders for the system you're in, and you can only do what the system allows you to do. And so for you, you can come up with all kinds of plot twists that they might have forgotten about or didn't think about. And so, for example, like again, you mentioned the Goliath one where they're fighting with what seemed like an ally that turned out to be the big bad. But then again, plot twist again, they're defeating the big bad, they take away her weapon, and she says, "Thank you for taking the curse away from me. Good luck with it."
Yeah. And you can also do little things that just startle people out of their comfort zone. Like you have 2 gorgeous courtesans. I'm trying a polite way to say whores. You know, because you're in a whorehouse. And they come up and they sashay because they're looking for customers, and they come up to the player characters, and one of them smiles and then says, "So." and everybody goes, "What?"
The smoker's cough.
Yeah. or you make it clear that they are somehow transformed guys, pissed off about it, older guys who can't get
Working
it up
off a
anymore.
debt.
Yeah, working off a debt, and everybody's going, "What?" You see, because you derailed the script that everybody around the table who is a forever DM or a veteran DM was expecting, and they're going, "No, I don't know what to do."
That's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You know. And then why are they transformed guys? Or why do they talk like transformed guys? Well, maybe a bunch of powerful wizards who are approaching lichdom but aren't yet ready, but their bodies are falling apart. So they've stashed their bodies upstairs in this whorehouse, and these nice ladies bring them their food and wipe their bums and take care of their decaying bodies while they just sit in a chair and try and survive. And they have, by the irresistible power of their magic, implanted their minds to control these ladies with these young, agile, strong bodies to do things for them, like, I always like cucumbers. Let's go buy some cucumbers. They don't want to leave the room, but they'll send her for some cucumbers, and maybe I can get a good price. Except now that they're in her head, it's, hey, maybe you can give me a good price on some cucumbers. And of course, then the guy who sells the cucumbers at the stall is going, what's going on? With these voices. And again, it doesn't have to be something like that, but little things that flip the script.
Yep.
That's what you're after. Because then you're engaging all of these people who might be bored if you followed the regular script. You flip the script for everybody, and they're now, what's going on? There's something, we got to get to the bottom of this. There's something that doesn't make sense here. Or, or the tax collector who comes out and says, you're the lucky winner. And he opens his gold bag of taxes and he starts giving you money. And then you're going, wait a minute, like 5 minutes after he leaves, are the soldiers going to come in and kill us for having all this money? And then, so you look out the window, and sure enough, there's a bunch of soldiers going, oh, has he left yet? Can we do it yet?
Yep.
Now what do you do? What do you do?
And then what do those experienced GMs do when the soldiers show up?
Yeah.
Probably roll for initiative, kill the soldiers, and here comes the next plot twist. Have the funeral procession for the soldiers go right past their house the next day with the widows, the orphan children of the soldiers, and just guilt trip the fuck out of them.
You see, we're shifting the script. We're flipping things away from what you expect to happen. Now, if you're going to do this, you should have figured out, even if it's just one line, that you've written down why these script flips and why the things are. You can't just do random shit, because if you do random shit for too long, everybody figures out there are no consequences in this game. It's just chaos. There are no cause and effect. And if there's no cause and effect and no consequences for anything, then why are we doing this? We'll just stay home. We'll just stay home and wait for the dragon to crash through our ceiling, and we'll gut it open and take all the treasure out of the dragon, right? You go, no, that's not how it works. Well, it seems like you can do anything in this world. It's not like, so you want to avoid that fatal trap of pissing off your players, because they need to know that there is a way in this setting to get a predictable reward. But it doesn't mean the things that happen to them until the reward happens need to be predictable.
Just avoid the standard tropes.
Yeah.
You'll win.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, and we did that in Waterdeep with something that was censored immediately by TSR. That a town on the caravan route didn't have a city watch. So it didn't need to tax as much. Well, the town had grown up around the local brothel. The gals from the brothel were the militia. So they defended the town. They took all the takings as a result of it, but they didn't act like that until they absolutely had to. So everybody was thinking, oh, these gorgeous gals, and the gorgeous gals will go, shh. I think it's about time you stop fucking around. Whoa! But because we worked it all out, it all made perfect sense. And then once they cottoned to that fact, then the whole way, the whole local economy of the town and the way things were run suddenly made sense. And if they knew that, but some of their travelers did not, they could then parlay that by nudging, maneuvering rivals into conflict, and then showing up saying, hey, we'll help you. And then they immediately see whether the women say, we don't require any help, thank you very much, or okay then, and then gain a tie, gain a sort of alliance or friendly, so it's all what you hand the players and what they do. But yeah, make them, surprise them with the unexpected. That's the first thing to do with your experienced veteran DMs who are playing. Because for another thing, they'll say, oh, I want to play in your game again, because that was fun. Because it wasn't dull, boring, and predictable. You know, just by surprising them, you won. You know, it's like, holy crap, this was fun. Let's do that again. Okay, next tour house, we ask first. Or whatever. Yeah.
So you said that was censored by TSR. Was that something you wrote that they were like, no, we can't publish this then?
Oh yeah, I just included it in my original Realms turnovers. It was in there, and they said, nope, because they had a code of conduct.
Which city was that, out of curiosity? Is it an existing one that's still
It's
there?
not a city, it's a town, Baragost. I needed ones that was on a road that they moved through, and there was another one just to the east of Riotop, and I can't remember what it was. So we had a similar thing, except all the local courtesans in that one, they were all doppelgangers, which you never found out because the fact that doppelgangers walk a little more slowly than humans never came up because they never left their rooms when they were on
Neither
duty.
do the mimics.
Yeah, neither do the mimics. But the thing is, the doppelgangers were very, very invested in keeping this quiet because once their secret was out, the whole thing was in jeopardy. So they've been doing it for years. And yeah, and things like that got taken out because TSR in those days of the Satanic Panic and so on had a very strong code of conduct. And that included things like evil could never win, which is why the Zentarim were portrayed like Keystone Cops. You know,
Baseballs disagrees.
yeah. So yeah, there were lots of things. Oh, there were many things that were censored by TSR because as a precocious little kid, I've been designing this as a story world for a decade before D&D came along. And I had firmly taken to heart the National Geographic philosophy, which can be put down to one line by saying, yes, the native women have long floppy breasts, I'm merely reporting this. You know, so I'm not placing any value judgments, I'm not getting salacious, but I'm just reporting on the world. And they just went through and said, nope, we can't have that, nope, we can't have it, because they're thinking about selling a product to the general public and not getting it turfed out of chains of stores in the United States at that time. So I totally understood why they were doing it, and I wasn't in a fight with them. It was just, this is what I've already written in my world, and I've been developing my world for 10 years without any thought of it being a D&D setting. So it's in there, and they just said, nope. And this thing is, remember, this is in the pre-pixel days. Word count rules for everything. It's actually, there's only so much space, and if you add you could say, yeah, you can add pages. Yeah, you're cutting your profit margin because pages, it costs you in paper and ink, you know. So there was always a, leave this out, it's not germane to the adventure. And that's always the route that you take. It's not like, we're gonna censor you, you dirty-minded thug. It's like, is this germane to the adventure? We should use that word count for more stuff that could add on to the adventure. And you can't argue with that very good design philosophy. Okay, I'd rather give them something else that furthers the adventure. You know, it's like, why? So we just changed the brothel to be something else and still leave the doppelgangers. Like the local counting house, which serves as the bank, is all staffed by doppelgangers. Where did they come from? What are they doing? And what do they do with the people who should be in the counting house? Killed and ate them. Or whatever, you know.
Since you guys are, the Actually Act just came out, and spent all this time working on this big city campaign. I've been trying to run a city campaign myself, and I always find that somehow the streets always feel empty, you know, because the players will be talking to a merchant, and there's presumably all kinds of stuff going on behind them, but it never gets brought up. And when they walk down the street, there's no one that talks to them unless they talk to them first, and it sometimes it can feel very empty. So how do you work towards making the city feel more alive around the party instead of just towards the party?
So the very first thing I asked Dad is, we don't start with an RPG, we start with a novel. And that's why The One-Eyed King was the very first thing we put out, because that gives you a window into the life in Athgoliath. And then there we had an all-star of characters that really became these little flagpoles that we said, okay, from these flagpoles, we can create these little breathing centers in the city. You know, Licoro Hearts Home, the King's Palace, you know, all of these places on the streets, these events that happen in the novel. Now all of a sudden we can start transposing those into a game universe. And our box set, we have several books that are going to be inside it. The book that we have at the booth is only the 30,000 foot overview of the entire city. So you've got like every single building outlined, but then afterwards we've got the adventure book, we've got the Dweller Creation book, we've got a deep dive of quadrants of sections of the city. So, and we have a Patreon that's going to be ongoing for years to come for that city. So, you know, when we ask the patrons, like, you know, that's a very good point. You know, give us more stuff that's happening in intersections in the city. Give us, you know, some sample intersections that we can have in a quick flip book that says, you know, we need, you know, 6 merchants and what's happening behind those stalls. Give us some intrigue that happens in a merchant alleyway or within a courtyard of a city block. And we already have some of that stuff, but you guys can guide us in terms of what else you want within a city, because the city is a very complex ecosystem. There are many things that we could cover inside that city, and that's why we kind of look to the fans for post box set release in terms of what do you guys need at your game table, right? So we have a vision of what we want to see, and that's part of like the initial release. But after that, it's a collaboration with everyone who's actually utilizing the books that we put out. It's what else do you guys need?
And if you grab it from the Patreon, it's either like a PDF in pixels or you've printed it out. And if you use it, cross it off. So you know the stuff you haven't used in that encounter that you can use somewhere else. In my novel, The One-Eyed King, it starts with 2 teenagers from different Hibernian clans who've never been in the big city before. And one of the things they've both been told is there's this friendly person who's part of the clan who already has a shop or whatever in the city. Go and see them for advice or if you have any trouble. So you'll get scenes of them walking through the streets of the city, not as a citizen who's used to it, but gawking around. This is all big and new to them.
Yeah.
So I describe the street traffic, I describe what people are saying, I describe what the shop fronts look like, because they're going, holy, as they go around a big city for the first time. So you can just crib that, swipe it. When I'm writing a novel set in a fantasy world, a gaming setting, I always make sure that there's stuff in the novel that is useful at the gaming table. For instance, when I started writing Realms novels way back with Spellfire, I put in a lot of stuff they cut right out because they didn't want it as a design decision, but I put it there. I put all the incantations, the actual verse of the incantation for every spell that was cast, and I described how the spell was cast. So if you fireball, it has a verbal component, a somatic component, and a material component. We know what the material components are, it's right in the player's handbook. We don't know what the somatic component is, other than that there's some sort of gesture, and we don't know what the incantation is. So I was writing things like, my tongue of bat and selfless reek in the mystic words I now to speak, where I wish to play my game, let empty air burst into flame! And I wrote that in and put it in, and they looked torn like I hadn't cut it back out again. But I was trying to put in a GM's description of every spell being cast, so you could just crib it and use it at the table if you wanted that level of ham acting, role playing. And I was doing that deliberately. It's like, hey, if you're paying money for a D&D novel, I'm going to give you something in it that helps you at D&D.
And it ties in beautifully.
Yeah.
That would have been super helpful when I read Spellfire.
Yeah. And yes, Spellfire, don't want to go off on a tangent, but they cut Spellfire by 2/3 in terms of length. Yeah, there was a lot that hit the cutting room floor. And those were an easy cut for them, because if they just make a policy decision of, we don't want our novels to ape the game mechanics too closely, then it's an easy cut to go through and take out all the detailed spells and just say, Elminster cast a fireball, move on.
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of your Patreon?
Athcliath, does anyone have the book? It's on the last page of the book. URL.
And if you want realm stuff, I have my own Patreon. It's just Ed Greenwood. Yeah, and
Yeah,
there-
patreon.com/athcliathrpg.
Athcliath RPG. Yeah.
You spell that?
ATHCLIATH RPG.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we plan on supporting it for years to come because we have so many ideas. Like when we start talking about world building, that's why we laughed. Like, how much time do you spend on world building? Like, a whole heck of a lot.
And Andrew
Yeah.
drove for 18 hours, picking me up very early on in that process to get here. So we had a lot of time in the car to say, and another thing.
And this and that. Yeah. Yeah, we geek out on this stuff. So yeah, we enjoy it very much. So we hope you guys enjoy the book as well.
If anybody wants more deep realms lore as well, Ed has a brand new YouTube channel, which is what we're doing here. And he also has his own brand new Patreon where he does weekly realms lore posts, and they're very, very deep dives, stuff like the Spellfire.
Yeah, so if you
anecdote
want me
stuff,
to,
a lot of the stuff like
to
that.
delve into a topic in depth, mention it. And we'll probably do a YouTube video where I talk about, like, the Manchun is the latest one, you know, and it's like, that's just one character. Well, you know, if next week somebody wants to know about night soil wagons and how they get the poo out of the city, I'll talk about that. That's no problem.
Well, thanks everyone for coming out.
Thank you.
I'm gonna snake past it really fast. All right, folks. Thanks again for tuning in. Again, these live streams that we've been doing from GaryCon have been kind of impromptu, to say the least. They are going to continue to increase in quality as we do other conventions. So just keep an eye out. And again, if you have more questions, comments, concerns, send them in the comment section or hit us up on Discord, or you can hit us up on the Patreon if you're a patron. And I just want to say thank you very much for everyone coming. Those that donated for Clutch, thank you so much. Yeah, stuff like that is going to facilitate us being able to actually increase our gear and make these better, so it's not just a guy holding a cell phone. But yeah, so all of you that donated, thank you so much. Sorry Ed wasn't able to answer, I guess, kind of like direct questions because this was more of a panel for GaryCon. But again, Ed does answer a lot of direct questions. We're going to start doing more regular live streams on the YouTube channel. And we're also going to be doing a lot more Q&A style stuff on the Patreon as well. So be on the lookout for that, and I hope you enjoyed. And this will be archived on the YouTube channel as well. And happy gaming, guys. Let me turn this off now.